new laptop, will I be able to claim back tax? And if so, how can I do that?
Well, that was one listener's question, and we've had a lot of similar ones, I must say. Live now to talk to Heather Self. She's the tax partner at accountants Blick Rothenberg. Heather Self, there are perhaps millions of people working from home for the first time, but their employer won't provide the equipment they need. If they buy it, can they get tax relief on it?
In general, yes, provided they have to work from home and they really need the equipment. But they'll only get the tax relief, they won't get the full cost. So if you had to buy something costing £100, if your employer pays for it, you get the full £100 back, although you might have to pay tax on that. But if you pay for it, you'll only get £20 of tax relief.
Yes, if you're a basic rate, or I suppose £40 if you're a higher rate. So you'll get some of it back anyway. And what can they claim for? You say spend £100. Can you claim phone bill, printer, paper, broadband, electricity? Can you claim on all those things?
The first thing to check is whether you actually have to work from home, and that's probably okay at the moment because a lot of workplaces are closed. But once workplaces reopen and your employer says you can come to work or you can stay at home if you want, you won't be able to claim after that point. So we're really just looking at this period of severe lockdown.
But what if your employer says half of you must work at home, half of you must come in, and you volunteer to work at home? Would that count?
I think that's going to get tricky, and what I would hope is that employers will make it clear so that you know whether you have to work at home or not.
So they'd write a letter to all the volunteers saying you must work at home. And what about those things I mentioned? Extra phone calls, maybe printing things out, broadband that you're using all the time, keeping warm, though that's not an issue today, of course.
So, firstly, there's a basic flat rate allowance, which either your employer can pay you or you can claim it yourself, and that's £6 a week or £26 a month. It's not a huge amount, but that is intended to cover the incidentals like a bit of extra electricity, perhaps some printer ink and printing. You then get on to the larger expenses. Broadband is a tricky one because the problem is that most people have got broadband already and they're using it to watch television or films and gaming online. They're not just using it for work. So you almost certainly can't claim your broadband connection.
What about something like you've got an old laptop, but if you work on it all day, it gives you backache. Can you buy, for example, maybe an office chair or a mouse or a nice monitor or a drawing pad to help you work 8 hours on the stretch, whereas normally with a laptop on the sofa, you might just do things for a couple of hours in the evening?
Yes, I think a laptop's a good example, and as your caller said, she really needs a new laptop because her old laptop won't cope. So that's perhaps going to cost, I don't know, perhaps £500 for a decent new laptop. I'm just picking a figure for the sake of example. Yes, she can claim for that. She can claim that amount against her income for tax purposes, so she will get just either 20% or 40% tax relief, depending what tax rate she's on.
And Heather, I've asked too many questions, but one final one. How? How do you do it in a few seconds?
There's a form called the P87. Go on the Revenue website and look at claim tax relief for your job expenses. That will tell you how to do it.
Heather Self, many thanks. And there'll be more about this on the podcast, as well as a refund success for a cancelled holiday. And just before you dash off to make that claim, keep those emails coming. They help us know what's concerning you at the moment. moneybox@bbc.co.uk. Moneybox Live this Wednesday afternoon with Felicity Hanna looks at turning a hobby or a bit of self-employed enterprise into a post-coronavirus job. I'm back with Moneybox as usual next Saturday. Today, producer Paul Waters, reporter Ben Carter, studio manager Adrian Bargava, and I'm Paul Lewis.
Thank you, Paul. Now on Radio 4, the gardener and author Alice Fowler, who's patron of the Orchard Project, makes the Radio 4 appeal on the charity's behalf.
Old apple tree, what shall we and hope we now will bear.
This wassail song would have been familiar to us centuries ago when blessing apple trees was an annual event. But since the 1950s, 90% of traditional orchards in the UK have been destroyed, taking many native fruit varieties with them. As a passionate apple grower, I'm proud to be patron of the Orchard Project, a national charity dedicated to putting orchards back into the heart of our urban communities. The charity has planted and restored over 430 orchards across the UK, training local groups to care for them. With the pandemic highlighting the fragility of global food supply chains, the Orchard Project's mission to connect us to a vital local food source is even more important.
Not quite. No, it needs to go deeper.
Recorded earlier in the spring, when it was safe for us to gather, these volunteers are digging on the Wenlock Barn estate in East London. Sarah has lived here for 20 years. She's witnessed green spaces disappear as new buildings go up. Tired of constructors dumping debris on the estate, the residents decided to plant an orchard. With the orchard project's help, a wasteland has been transformed into a beautiful community space. The 16 fruit trees, from apples to apricots, now attract grasshoppers, goldfinches, bees and butterflies. In an inner-city area, this bursting pocket of nature is so important for well-being. And Sarah believes the orchards have really helped neighbours to connect and trust each other. It felt like there was an invisible wall around the estate, she says. But the orchard has brought non-residents in. We feel pride in where we live, and we couldn't have done this without the orchard project. Workshops are being delivered online until the charity can safely go back to working with groups out in the orchards. You can help transform neighbourhoods like Sarah's by donating today. Please give now to ensure the future of our orchards and help biodiversity to flourish. £25 could plant a tree. £100 could plant an orchard. We know it may be difficult to post your donations at this time, so you can always give by phone. Just have your credit or debit card to hand before calling 0800 404 8144. That's 0800 404 8144. Or you can give online by going to bbc.co.uk/appeal/Radio 4. Or you can write a cheque to the Orchard Project and send it to Free Post BBC Radio 4 Appeal. That's Free Post BBC Radio 4 Appeal. Please mark the back of your envelope the Orchard Project. Thank you.
Alice Fowler, and calls are free from landlines and mobiles. You can find all the details for giving online if you search for BBC Radio 4 Appeal. And now let's look ahead to the Westminster Hour with Carolyn Quinn.
Thank you very much. The Prime Minister wants us to unlock the lockdown slowly, but what does it mean in practice? There are no obvious or easy routes out, and with England's new slogan rejected by the devolved nations, can the UK proceed in a united way? With Boris Johnson's latest statement then still ringing in our ears, we'll be chewing it over in the company of the Justice Secretary Robert Buckland, the Shadow Cabinet Minister Bridget Phillipson and the acting Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey, who all join me live. And Katie Balls, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, will be with us as well, bringing us all the background, the detail and the analysis, and looking forward to what we can expect in the coming week. Join us if you can then at 10 for the Westminster Hour.
Thanks, Carolyn. Now, last word with Matthew Bannister.
On Last Word this week, the Hollywood and Bollywood actor Irfan Khan, the anti-apartheid activist Dennis Goldberg, and the long-distance walker Anne Sayer. But we start with the obstetrician Catherine Hamlin, who with her husband Reg devoted herself to tackling a problem that had devastating effects for young women in Ethiopia. The work came to the attention of the American TV presenter Oprah Winfrey.
This terrified 12-year-old girl is being forced into marriage, a common practice in the African country of Ethiopia. If she's like many girls in these small villages, she'll soon be pregnant, even though her small and underdeveloped body is not ready to give birth. Many of these girls, some as young as 13, struggle with labor for days without medical assistance and usually deliver a stillborn. But that is just the beginning of their nightmare, because the trauma of labor rips apart their insides, leaving these girls to drip a constant stream of urine that follows them wherever they go. They develop an internal hole called a fistula, and no matter how hard they try to stay clean, they smell of waste. Most become social outcasts and are abandoned by their husbands, families, and villages. Often believing that there is no cure, they're then left to live alone in despair for the rest of their lives. Please welcome Dr. Catherine Hamlin.
Catherine was born in Sydney, Australia. She trained as a doctor at the city's university and was interviewed for a job in obstetrics by Reginald Hamlin, who later became her husband. The couple worked together in different places around the world, but then answered an advert for someone to set up a school of midwifery in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. The journalist Julia Langdon visited their hospital during the 1980s.
She exuded a sort of pale power, I think, in that hospital. I went there in 1985 at the time of the famine that got the world's attention then. And we went to the hospital, which was a very, very basic building. It had a corrugated iron roof, as I recall. It was like a sort of depot delivery office. It didn't feel like a hospital at all. But the work they were doing there was just wonderful.
Can you tell me about the problems that they were addressing, that women were facing who came along as patients?
Reg and Catherine Hamlin had come to Ethiopia about 20 years before and realised that one of the problems in the country was that because there is no transport infrastructure, it's a very undeveloped country with a very large and rural population. There were huge problems in midwifery. And the main problem in Ethiopia is because of lack of proper nutrition and girls getting married very young, you have a problem in obstetrics, which leads to women being unable to deliver their babies because the babies are too big and their bodies are too small, and they end up with what is known in gynecological terms as a fistula.
Girls in Ethiopia, especially in the north of the country, do marry early.
What is early? What is early?
Well, they might be betrothed at 8 or 9.
They are having children and their little bodies aren't ready for it.
Yes.
That's part of the problem because they're too young and they push,
yes.
They push and they create these...
Because she's got nobody in the village, no antenatal care, no midwife to help her.
They'd walk for 3 days to a road to hitch a lift to make their way to the capital. There was one woman who apparently spent 7 years begging at a bus stop before she got there. It was very, very tragic, the circumstances.
The only reason she can deliver is because the baby inside the mother gets smaller when it's dead, and she can push it out as a dead baby. But she wakes up to a worse horror, finding her bed soaked in urine. And day after day, this
And that's because all of that pushing has created that hole.
A fistula is just a hole between an internal organ and the outside world.
The operation to cure the problem is very simple, and the Hamlins would just stitch them up and give them a new dress and their bus fare, and they'd go back to their village. Both the Hamlins, and Catherine in particular, were very, very committed Christians, and it was this which was the inspiration, I think, of their work. She was a very dedicated, quiet person.
We treat them all freely because they're poor. They've got nothing.
And how are you funded?
We beg.
You beg?
My husband used to say we're professional beggars.
You beg.
She wrote a book called The Hospital by the River. And honestly, you will never read a book which will make you cry so. And she said she was trying to break the hearts of millionaires. And that's what she succeeded in doing. Oprah Winfrey gave her $500,000 of her own money, and the watchers of the Oprah Winfrey show apparently produced another $3 million. So her extraordinary record, their extraordinary record, was that they got 6 hospitals built, a lot of midwifery clinics, and also they've trained midwives. So there is a real move forward.
How did the government react to what they were doing?
Well, when I was there, it was when Mengistu, the Marxist leader of the Marxist government, had taken over, and they were very hostile. It was very, very difficult, and they were very, very, very nervous, and they thought they were going to be closed down any time.
And does the work now continue after Catherine's death?
Very much so. There is a great deal more activity in training midwives. I think other midwifery schools have opened. 60,000 women have had this operation solely as a result of the Hamlins. And Catherine Hamlin was an extraordinary obstetrician and a very remarkable woman.
Now I'm standing in front of the Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital.
This is our main ward. These are all post-operative patients.
How do you say hello?
Tenacity.
Tenacity.
They're shy.
Hello. Hello. It's great.
They're pleased to see you.
Pleased to see you.
Thank you.
Oprah Winfrey with Catherine Hamlin, who's died aged 96. Now, Irfan Khan was the actor who became a star in both Indian and Hollywood films. While Western audiences saw him in The Amazing Spider-Man, A Mighty Heart and The Life of Pi, he was also appearing in hugely popular and critically acclaimed Bollywood films. Irfan Khan was born in a village in Jaipur, the son of a tyre shop owner. His parents wanted him to become a teacher or a doctor, but he was determined to take up acting. He explained why.
Initially, I chose it for fame and money, but as I entered into drama school and understood the potential of it, the most important thing to become an actor was to explore yourself and to reflect on yourself and your surrounding and your society.
The show business editor of the Eastern Eye newspaper, Asjad Nazir, became friendly with Irfan Khan. Asjad says for years after he left drama school, Irfan struggled to find work, but then success came out of the blue.
All hope seemed lost. He found his big break in the most unexpected place. Asif Kadia was casting for his film The Warrior, and he was very specific about the person that he wanted to cast. Finally, he zeroed in on Irfan. He gave a really beautiful quote. He looked like he'd murdered a lot of people and felt really bad about it. And that was the reason that prompted him to cast him in The Warrior. And The Warrior changed Irfan's life. The film won lots of awards internationally and opened up lots and lots of doors for Irfan. And all throughout Irfan's rise, he never forgot the role that Asif Kapadia played in casting him in The Warrior, and they remained lifelong friends.
If you had to pick out two of his most successful roles, what would they be?
It's really difficult to just pick two roles because he had two parallel careers. He had a career in India where he was mixing up big commercial blockbusters with small, meaningful films that made a massive impact. In terms of his films in India, the film that really sums up him as a man and as an actor was a film called The Lunchbox. Now, The Lunchbox only got made because Irfan believed in the project. He turned down an opportunity to star in Interstellar. It's almost like a brief encounter with an added touch of Indian food.
For some time you let me into your dreams. And I want to thank you for that.
It became the biggest crossover Hindi language film probably of all time. One of the greatest mysteries in Indian cinema in the last 50 years is why they didn't put that film forward for an Oscar.
And what about if you had to pick out one of the big blockbuster films that he was involved in?
The film that I would really pick out is Jurassic Park. When the first Jurassic Park film came out in the early 90s, he couldn't afford to buy a ticket to go and see the film. And then by the time the fourth film came out in 2015, he was playing the billionaire owner of the park.
Think it'll scare the kids?
The kids? This will give the parents nightmares.
Is that good?
And for me, that summed up his remarkable rise from struggling actor to becoming a massive international movie star.
And was he aware of that irony himself? Was that something he talked about?
The thing with Irfan is he always remained humble and he always remained connected to his roots. He did films like Life of Pi, The Amazing Spider-Man, Inferno, but he always remained connected to his roots. There's a beautiful film called Piku.
You know वो मेरे ऊपर dependent है. तो अगर किसी को मुझे शादी करनी है तो
तुम्हारे 9 साल के बच्चे को साथ में अडॉप्ट करना पड़ेगा.
बिल्कुल करोगे.
He believed in it so much that he gave up a role in The Martian opposite Matt Damon. He was a man that became a global movie star and he always remained connected to his roots. He always remained humble. I was blessed to spend a lot of time with him.
What qualities do you think he had as an actor?
I think his greatest quality was the fact that it seemed like he wasn't acting. He was a chameleon-like actor. You forgot about him as a movie star. You forgot about his personality. He was so natural on screen.
And when you spent time with him, how did he cope with the pressures of fame? How did he cope with people coming up and wanting to speak to him in the street and that kind of thing?
He was just a really, really normal, down-to-earth human being. He would just treat everybody like they were his friends. He was this happy-go-lucky guy. He would just talk to people like they were his mates that he'd known forever. We went to the cinema and he disguised himself and nobody knew that the lead star of the movie was sitting in the cinema hall with them. He just blended into the audience, watched the film, and then we quietly left.
Some actors mind watching themselves on the screen, but did he mind watching himself?
No, he liked it. And one of the things that he always said to me was that if you don't like my performances, tell me. I would rather you're honest with me. Tell me if I do something bad on screen.
And you talked earlier about him getting behind the project, and I understand he also was a moving force behind the Slumdog Millionaire movie getting made. Is that right?
Danny Boyle recently said that that film would not have got made without Irfan's help.
Well, the Slumdog Parks. Money and women, reasons to make most mistakes in life. It looks like you have mixed up both.
Irfan was probably the only one of the Bollywood actors involved that had done international cinema before. So when the film was being made, beyond doing his role, he helped Danny Boyle and the crew get the film made.
Did he enjoy his success, do you think? Do you think that made him happy that he'd finally achieved his ambition after those years of struggle?
He absolutely loved what he did. He loved his craft more than the stardom. And the fact that when he had such a devastating illness, he managed to do one more film was just astonishing. He had a neuroendocrine tumour, which is one of the most serious forms of cancer, and yet during his treatment he somehow managed to do one last film before he passed away. It's a Bollywood movie called Angrezi Medium, and there was kind of almost like an irony in it because when he got diagnosed with his illness, he was getting the Best Actor award for a film called Hindi Medium.
Thank you very much for acknowledging me in the right context. I waited for it for a long time.
He was a massive movie star in India, and everyone mourned his loss. Everyone from high-ranking politicians to every single member of the film fraternity paid tribute to him. But then it was also a massive loss in Hollywood as well. Hollywood is the most multicultural it's ever been, and one of the reasons why is because Irfan ventured out into Hollywood and did so many films there without losing touch with his Indian roots. And by balancing both industries, he's kind of brought the world closer together, and I think that's going to be his legacy.
Asjad Nazir on Irfan Khan, who's died aged 53. Now, Dennis Goldberg was a leading member of the African National Congress, a committed campaigner against apartheid in South Africa, and a co-defendant with Nelson Mandela at the notorious Rivonia trial, which led to them both being sentenced to life in prison for trying to overthrow the government. The former British High Court Judge Sir Nicholas Stadlen became a friend of Dennis Goldberg.
He had a natural joie de vivre, he had intellectual curiosity, he was deeply thoughtful, he had a huge sense of humour and an infectious laugh, he had genuine warmth, deep compassion for the oppressed, but above all he was just endlessly talking.
My parents were communists. I'd come from England. I'm a first generation South African. My parents, when I started school, on my 6th birthday, 11th of April 1939, said, you're going to be under attack because of their politics, because you're Jewish, all of these things. And indeed I was.
Dennis's Jewish parents had fled persecution in Europe to settle in South Africa. They were lifelong communists who explained the injustices of the apartheid system to their son. Dennis studied engineering at the University of Cape Town, but his political activities were already bringing him to the attention of the authorities. He went on to become a key member of the armed wing of the ANC.
After the government introduced draconian legislation in 1963, he was such a high-profile person in Cape Town that he was advised he should go abroad for military training. And whilst he was in Johannesburg en route to go abroad, Joe Slovo persuaded him to stay for a few weeks to find munitions for the possible, but not yet approved, guerrilla war that was under discussion. And so he stayed in the safe house at the Liliesleaf farm in the Rivonia suburb of Johannesburg, hence the name Rivonia Trial, and was there on the day of the raid when most of the top leadership of the ANC, the High Command of MK, were arrested.
We fight against two features which are the hallmarks of African life.
Nelson Mandela's impassioned speech from the dock at the trial made headlines around the world. The defendants were accused of treason and faced the death penalty, but they agreed to use the public platform to communicate their opposition to apartheid.
At the very outset, they all agreed that they were going to turn this from legal into a political trial, putting apartheid in the dock of international opinion, because under a quirk of South African law, the papers were free to publish the proceedings of court. They then took a further step which made their execution all the more likely when they said that they would not deny having been involved in acts of sabotage, although never directed or taking any risks of human life. They thirdly decided that they would not expose Mandela to being cross-examined, so that when he made his political speech from the dock, he couldn't be interrupted by the prosecutor, Percy Utah. But most remarkably, Dennis went one step further, and he offered to pretend that he had exceeded his mandate when making inquiries about buying casements for hand grenades, if that would save the lives of the black leaders of the ANC. And he was thereby effectively offering to sign his own death warrant.
Was Dennis treated differently from the other defendants because he was white?
He was deliberately elevated to defendant number 3 because Percy Utah, the prosecutor, wanted to make an example of him as the white traitor.
Actually, the judge said the appropriate sentence in a case which is tantamount to high treason would be the death penalty. He said the ultimate sentence. But that but meant he wasn't going to impose the death sentence. We started smiling. And then he said, but the only leniency was life imprisonment on each of the counts on which we'd been found guilty. And I called to my mother, and I said, it's life, and life is wonderful.
It was one of the cruelties of apartheid that its tentacles spread even into the prison system. And they, the other 7, were locked up together in the same cell block in Robben Island. And Dennis, on his own, alone of the convicted defendants, had to endure the isolation of being in a whites-only prison in Pretoria. And they subsequently said that although Dennis had better rations as a white prisoner, he had much the worse of it because he lacked the support of his comrades.
All I can say is prison's not a very nice place. I don't recommend it. But if you come through it, and we were able to study by long-distance study through the University of South Africa, that was an absolute lifesaver because they cut us off from all news. If a visitor tried to tell us what was happening, they would cut the visit short. My dad was threatened with never being able to visit me again. He was in his 80s.
What happened to Dennis after his release in 1985?
The glory of Dennis Goldberg's life is that, unlike some who had swimming pools in their gin palaces paid for by the dwellers of the shantytowns, he retained the integrity and commitment and self-sacrifice that had led him to prison for the rest of his life. He spent 10 years plus in London working for the ANC for a pittance. The highlight of his post-prison career was that when he retired, he spent over a decade traveling the country and the world, giving talks and lectures about the struggle, and donating all his fees to one of the 2 charities that he supported.
Was he a critic of what happened in South African politics after Mandela's death?
He was a fierce critic of the Zuma years of corruption and cronyism.
Corruption is a problem. I personally believe, and I would say it publicly as I do in South Africa, the members of the ANC need to renew the leadership from top to bottom. I'm not going to name names because it's a problem throughout, from national, provincial and local government level. A full clear out. It needs a definite attempt by members to say enough is enough.
At Mandela's funeral, a foreign leader told Cyril Ramaphosa that South Africa was blessed by the most precious natural asset, living heroes. And although Dennis's death depletes that asset, his courage and self-sacrifice, his integrity and his commitment to freedom and equality will undoubtedly endure as a reminder of the noble ideals that led to the Rainbow Nation.
Sir Nicholas Stadlen on Dennis Goldberg, who's died aged 87. Now, some say Anne Sayer was one of the greatest British athletes you've never heard of. She was a British rowing international who then turned her hand, or should I say feet, to long-distance walking, and she did it very fast. Anne was born in Whitstable in Kent and was a geologist by profession, but her walking was her passion. The sports journalist and fellow long-distance walker Julie Welsh made the mistake of underestimating Anne at their first meeting.
I just saw this old lady. I thought, oh gosh, and I went up to her and I said, are you sure this pace isn't too fast for you? Which is one of the most cringe-making memories of my life because, of course, she was our greatest ever female race walker.
And so when you went for the walk with her, did she walk quickly?
I was walking alongside her, really quite hurrying, and I thought, oh, well done me, I'm keeping up with Anne Sayer. And then she saw somebody she knew in the distance, and she said, oh, well, bye, I must go. And she was off. Like, I don't know, she did about 200 metres in 5 seconds. It was incredible.
And did she have a physique that was built for walking quickly?
She was probably made to do long-distance walking. She was 6 foot tall, incredibly long legs. I mean, I swear my shoulders reached them. She was just mainly legs. Very, very tall woman. She had these sort of greying blonde curls by the time I knew her, but when she was in her prime, you know, she just had this amazing kind of curly mop of fair hair, these long legs. She strode along. Her nickname was Metronome because her pace was just so relentless and unremitting.
Did she ever explain to you what it was that attracted her to the idea of walking long distances so quickly?
Before she was a race walker, she was a rowing international, so obviously she was a very good athlete at whatever she did. She was somebody who just was made to do what she did, which was walking very fast. And of course, when she decided in her late 30s to take up race walking, women then were only allowed to race walk 5 kilometres, which is, you know, what, a trip to the shops or something like that. But she wanted to go for really, really long distances. And she was actually told, well, we can't stop you using the road, but of course, you know, your name won't feature in any of the results. And of course, when the results came up, if she had been in the results, she would have got a medal because she finished 3rd. I mean, that was her first race walk. She was that good.
And she was the first woman in Britain to qualify as a centurion. This is somebody who, in 24 hours, goes 100 miles, which is an extraordinary feat, isn't it?
Well, it is. To qualify as a centurion, which is an exclusive club for walkers, yes, you have to do 100 miles in under 24 hours. And in fact, Anne has gone even faster than 24 hours. I mean, I think that was just entry level for her. She subsequently did a 100-mile centurion race in 20 hours. It's something that I couldn't even contemplate, but she was the first woman actually to qualify as a centurion, and she applied to be able to call herself a member of this club, and people actually threatened to resign rather than admit her.
You say people, you mean men threatened to resign?
Certain men did threaten to resign rather than admit a woman into their ranks. I mean, we are talking now 1977, something like that. 2 years later, she tried to enter another centurion race, and she was told that she wasn't allowed to because they didn't have the facilities for women.
Did she get angry about that sort of thing?
She was actually a very calm woman. She said I wasn't a raving feminist or anything like that. I was quite bolshy about it because she just thought, well, you know, why shouldn't a woman do this?
Well, there's another achievement I want to talk about, which is that in 1980, she did the fastest ever walk from Land's End to John O'Groats by a woman in 13 days, 17 hours and 42 minutes. Has that ever been beaten?
The time has been beaten by 2 women, but both Sandra and Sharon ran some of the distance, whereas Anne Sayer actually walked every step. So that record has never been beaten. I would safely say she is one of Britain's greatest female athletes and has always been completely unsung because, of course, long-distance walking is not really a very sexy sport.
Did she mind that? Was she upset about not getting the kind of recognition she would have got if she'd been in a different sport?
I don't think she was someone who went for recognition. She was actually quite a private person. And I mean, she knew her own worth, but she never ever sort of trumpeted it or anything like that. She was absolutely secure in what she could do and what she could achieve. She was very proud of being made MBE for services to women's sport, which is she said, you know, it's for a continuum. It's, you know, I was just part of the chain of women pioneering in sport. But she was very proud of her MBE. If you went to her house, it was on display. You know, she never ever called attention to her feats, and she was somebody who was really a team person. So it was quite interesting that, of course, what she excelled at was a really, really solitary sport.
Julie Welsh on Anne Sayer, who's died aged 83. This week you also heard last words on the anti-apartheid activist Dennis Goldberg, the actor Irfan Khan and the obstetrician Catherine Hamlin. Don't forget we're available as a podcast. Just search for Last Word on the BBC Sounds app. But we leave you this week with the music of the Stranglers. Their keyboard player Dave Greenfield has died aged 71. He was known for his distinctive style on many instruments, including the harpsichord and the Hammond organ. Dave co-wrote one of the band's biggest hits, Golden Brown, a song about heroin with an unusual series of time signatures.
Golden brown, texture like sun, lays me down, with my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown, with golden brown. Every time, just like the last, on her ship, tied to the mast, to distant lands, takes both my hands, never a frown, with golden brown.
Last Word was presented by Matthew Bannister and produced by Neil George. Over on BBC Radio 4 Extra, John Finnemore's souvenir programme starts the Comedy Club in just a few moments.
BBC Radio 4, it's 10 o'clock. Welcome to 60 Minutes of Political Comment with me, Carolyn Quinn, and my guests. This is the Westminster Hour. The main news tonight, Boris Johnson has outlined what he's called a conditional plan to ease the coronavirus lockdown in England, allowing people to exercise more outdoors and urging anyone who can't work from home to return to their jobs. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that the Prime Minister's address to the nation raised as many questions as it answered. The Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has insisted the changes announced by Mr Johnson apply only in England, and the stay-at-home message remains in place in Scotland. Coming up, the Prime Minister wants us to unlock the lockdown slowly then. But what does his plan mean in practice? And with England's new slogan rejected by the devolved nations, can the UK proceed in any kind of united way? Well, we'll be getting the views of the Justice Secretary Robert Buckland, the Shadow Cabinet Minister Bridget Phillipson, and the acting Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey, who all join me live. And Katie Balls, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, is with us as well, bringing us all the background detail and analysis. That's all coming up after the news read for us this evening by Chris Aldridge.
Boris Johnson has ruled out an early end to the coronavirus lockdown and put forward what he called the shape of a plan to slowly begin easing the restrictions in England. In an address to the nation, the Prime Minister said schools and non-essential shops would not begin to reopen until the beginning of June at the earliest, and pubs and restaurants would have to wait until at least July. But people will be able to leave their homes whenever they want from Wednesday, as long as they maintain social distancing. Labour said Mr Johnson's statement lacked clarity and raised as many questions as answers. Here's our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
The coronavirus has robbed governments of the capacity to be definitive about the future. This was a speech laden with caution and caveats and was short on detail. It all depends on a series of big ifs, the Prime Minister said, a sentence that could have been the title of his address. Ministers have long said they would ease the lockdown in England as evidence built up that the NHS could cope, death rates were falling, the infection rate was decreasing, testing and the supply of personal protective equipment for medics was increasing, and there was no risk of a second peak. Tonight, Boris Johnson said,
"Though we have made progress in satisfying at least some of the conditions I have given, we have by no means fulfilled all of them. And so, no. This is not the time simply to end the lockdown this week. Instead, we're taking the first careful steps to modify our measures.
This was, he added, the shape of a plan, the first sketch of a roadmap, and one conditional on containing the spread of the virus. A new COVID alert system is being set up. Level 1 will mean the disease is no longer present in the UK. Level 5 is the most critical. Throughout the lockdown, the country has been at Level 4. These changes mark the beginnings of moves to Level 3. The Prime Minister said anyone in England who can't work from home should be actively encouraged to go to work, but people should avoid public transport if at all possible. From Wednesday, unlimited amounts of outdoor exercise are allowed. People can sit out in the park, drive to other destinations and meet one person outside who doesn't live with you, provided you stay 2 metres apart. And there was a tentative plan for schools.
At the earliest by June the 1st, after half-term, we believe we may be in a position to begin the phased reopening of shops and to get primary pupils back into schools, in stages beginning with reception, Year 1 and Year 6. Our ambition is that secondary pupils facing exams next year will get at least some time with their teachers before the holidays.
Mr Johnson added people flying into the UK would face a period of quarantine, and the earliest some pubs and restaurants could reopen would be July. There is now a gap between hearing from the Prime Minister tonight and the publication of a document tomorrow with around 50 pages of detail. A government official said it was hoped nurseries would reopen at the same time as primary schools, but it was acknowledged there were no plans for most secondary school pupils in England to return to classrooms before September. It's hoped those with exams next year might get to head back before the summer holidays, but there are no specifics on timing. For those of any age who are shielding, there is no change in the advice. But tonight, there are still countless questions, and the uncertainty is magnified by the First Ministers of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland leaving their advice to stay at home unchanged. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer.
What I would have done is to try to build a consensus. And I said this to the Prime Minister over the last 10 days or so. Make sure that, if possible, all the devolved administrations, the trade unions and community groups are on board, know exactly what's required of them and pull together. But to lack that basic clarity and consensus is a real problem.
Clarity will be the frequent demand from many, but providing it won't be easy. Any of these changes could be reversed or delayed if there's another spike in cases of the virus.
The governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have all decided to keep the core health message to stay at home rather than replace it with stay alert. People in Scotland are now allowed outside to exercise more than once a day, but the First Minister warned them it was not a licence to start sunbathing and having picnics or barbecues. Nicola Sturgeon said the new UK government advice was not easy to understand.
Having just watched the Prime Minister, I think there is perhaps still some room for just simpler, clearer messages. I'm particularly concerned, although we're not changing the message in Scotland, that if you move away from stay at home to something much vaguer, then we don't give, clear messages to the public about what you should and shouldn't be doing. So that's the way we have been driving down this infection, and it's the way we will consolidate and solidify that progress.
Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith assesses the extent of Scotland's divergence from other parts of the UK in its approach to tackling the virus.
Nicola Sturgeon is very clear about what she believes could happen if she were to start significantly easing lockdown restrictions in Scotland prematurely. People will die unnecessarily, she says bluntly, so she will not follow the Prime Minister in changing any of the guidelines except to allow people outdoors more than once a day for exercise. Throughout this crisis, the Scottish Government has been happy to diverge from the rules in place for England, announcing the closure of schools earlier, advising people to wear face coverings in busy public places nearly 2 weeks ago. And lockdown restrictions will clearly be eased more slowly in Scotland, in part because the rate of infection may still be slightly higher than in other parts of the UK. The First Minister insists she is committed to what's known as the Four Nations approach, where all parts of the UK operate under broadly the same rules. She's also clearly angry that she found out about the Prime Minister's plans to change his slogan from stay at home to stay alert in the newspapers this morning. He can do what he believes is best for England, she says, but she will stick to her own policy for Scotland and won't be rushed into changing her plans.
The head of the business group, the CBI, said today marked the first glimmer of light for the UK's faltering economy. But the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, Francis O'Grady, called the statement a recipe for confusion and possibly chaos.
People are being encouraged to go back to work, but without any answers on what happens on public transport, what happens if you've got children, what happens if you're supposed to be shielded or vulnerable in some other way. How can working people be confident that they can work safely until they at least see what the government is proposing for their safety?
Boris Johnson's announcement will affect the everyday lives of tens of millions of people in England. Our correspondent Danny Savage has been gauging the reaction to his statement in the town of Middlewich in Cheshire.
At 7 o'clock this evening, the nation tuned in to listen to the Prime Minister. What would the revised guidelines mean to them? Ian Camacho has 3 young daughters. The oldest are not in school years, earmarked to return anytime soon, but his youngest could go back in June.
We obviously understand the importance of education for the kids and the social aspect, but we don't know if it's safe to have one going in and 2 not, and how are the teachers going to cope, particularly in reception? That'll be the year going back for us. How do you tell 4- and 5-year-olds to be distant from each other? I think it might be quite scary for 4- and 5-year-olds to be sat around with masks on and to have teachers that have masks on, etc.
Across the road, Titch and Reg Price are both retired and claiming their pensions. They would have liked to have seen no restrictions lifted.
We were sort of like, well, let's have another 3 weeks. Never mind the grandchildren. Let's make it safe.
I mean, I'm diabetic and I've had 5 different cancers. I don't think that people in this country, in England, will stay at home. They'll start to go out now. It worries me because I'm more likely to get it the more people go out.
Another resident of this modern development in Cheshire is Matt Hitchin. He works in logistics and has concerns about the call to return to work.
What message do we give to our staff tomorrow? No, you've got to come into work. They can't, because they can't use anyone. The kids can't go to school, they can't go to babysitters, they can't go to grandparents. So again, it's just confusion.
Over the coming days, people will pore over the detail of the changes and then work out how their lives can fit around them.
Danny Savage reporting.
Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome to the Westminster Hour with me, Carolyn Quinn. Joining me on my panel tonight to chew over that statement from the Prime Minister are Robert Buckland, the Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor, and he's also the MP for South Swindon. Bridget Phillipson is on the line for us, Labour MP for Horton and Sunderland South, who's just been appointed to Keir Starmer's top table as Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Hello, Bridget.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, and Sir Ed Davey, co-leader of the Liberal Democrats, MP for Kingston and Surbiton, is with us as well, and will be leader into next year as well, as this year's planned leadership elections being postponed, like so many other things, because of coronavirus. Isn't that right, Ed?
That's right. The Federal Board decided that it should be postponed.
Well, it'll happen sometime next year. And talking of postponements, Katie Balls, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, welcome to you as well. And Katie, just tell us where you should have been this weekend.
Not that Westminster Hour isn't my first choice, but I had planned to be on my honeymoon a week after getting married, but unfortunately both things are going to have to wait, and potentially for quite some time listening to the Prime Minister tonight.
Robert Buckland, I don't think the Prime Minister did mention anything about weddings in his statement earlier this evening. Can you help Katie and her fiancé safe scheduling their big day for next year?
Katie, you'll be glad to know that we are giving anxious consideration to the issue of marriages. We want to help people like you, but there are also some people who are really, they want to get married because things are happening in their life that means they might not be together for a long time, and therefore I'm giving a lot of anxious consideration to the effect of the potential changes here as to what we can do with regard to marriage ceremonies. So watch this space. We're working on it.
Watch that space. And Bridget, seeing friends, having family gatherings again, it's probably the thing that most of us are most looking forward to, isn't it?
I think it's natural that people will be really missing that, especially at a point of a bank holiday weekend, when I know that, you know, many of my constituents would have taken that opportunity to perhaps travel a bit further afield and see family who live elsewhere. This weekend, it's not by no means in the same league as Katie, who I really feel for. I would have been running the Sunderland 10K today. It's a great local event. It would have raised lots of money for local charity. There's been a virtual event organised, and hopefully at some point we might be able to have the real world event, but it does have an impact on the local economy and on kind of charity fundraising, so it's a shame, understandably, but a shame it wasn't able to go ahead.
Well, look, we're looking now this evening at what the Prime Minister called the first sketch of his roadmap for reopening society after just under 2 months of lockdown. It took the Prime Minister, in fact, 13 minutes to set it out. There'll be more detail and documents published tomorrow when Boris Johnson makes a statement to Parliament. But at the heart of his TV address this evening was a change of emphasis in England, actively encouraging people to return to work if they can't work from home. They should avoid public transport if at all possible in order to maintain social distancing. He said the government had been working to establish new guidance for employers to make workplaces COVID secure. From Wednesday, people can take unlimited amounts of exercise outside, and you can even drive to other destinations to do so, he said. We can expect more detail on that tomorrow, on the kinds of sports that can resume: tennis, angling, water sports, for example. There'll be a phased reopening of shops and primary schools from June the 1st at the earliest, and from July, some elements of the hospitality sector could open again. Most likely that'll be cafes or restaurants with outdoor seating where people can sit separately. And all of this, of course, depending on the virus not spreading and on the public sticking to the social distancing rules. But the Prime Minister's message to stay alert to the dangers of the virus rather than just stay at home has put England on a different track to the rest of the UK. The leaders of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as you heard there in the news, said that they hadn't been consulted over the change and that they would be sticking with the stay at home slogan. So, Katie, first of all, last week there was a lot of bigging up of this potential statement, and perhaps some people's hopes were raised. In the end, it's limited change in England. What are you picking up about reaction to the Prime Minister's address?
So I think within the Tory party, there were high expectations for this statement, even though there was a big concentrated effort by both Number 10 and ministers at the daily government press conference to try and, I think, re-level expectations, saying there isn't going to be an immediate end to lockdown. But I do think the fact that, it is a roadmap to a degree, but the Prime Minister suggests it's a sketch of a roadmap. And I think the fact there are so many hypotheticals in it is a cause of frustration to some in the party, though clearly it is a constantly moving situation, which is why it's difficult. I think one of the things here is ultimately, when it comes to the decisions, one of the things we've heard about at the weekend, and I think has been a theme here, is the sense that lots of figures in the Conservative Party, and that includes some ministers in Cabinet, feel as though they're not being consulted in the way they would like to be when these decisions are being made. So today we had a Cabinet call take place and also a COBRA meeting. But actually, if you go back a few days, it feels that the main action, the room where it happened to a degree, was when the so-called Quad, which are the 4 Cabinet ministers who chair the various coronavirus subcommittees, Michael Gove, Matt Hancock, Rishi Sunak, Dominic Raab, met on Wednesday, and that's where the outlines of the plans were made. So I think there is a sense amongst some of the Cabinet, and perhaps one of the guests on the show might have an opinion on this, that actually that they're finding out things a bit later than they'd wish, and I think that is creating some discontent.
Well, Robert, did you know the full detail of what he was going to say today?
I knew that the detail of his speech earlier in the day. I knew that the plan had been outlined and had been prepared.
Were you asked what you thought of it?
Yeah, and I've had every opportunity, and I've taken that opportunity over the last few days and indeed weeks to make my views very forcibly heard. I'm somebody who is very much a realist about this, bearing in mind the fact that you can make...
hawk or a dove?
You can, well, That description, I think, is really, it doesn't actually get it right.
All right, but did you want more movement towards opening things up?
What I wanted is a sense of understanding where the public is, and you can make all these wonderful plans, but if there isn't confidence out there and a feeling that the public are ready for a change, then what's the point? And certainly from my experience, constituency MP, talking to people remotely and dealing with emails, I think there is a sense of caution out there. I think the public do need reassurance. I think they need to be encouraged and to be supported. They've come a long way in a particular direction. The biggest change in culture and habits since I've said the end of rationing, in the 50s. Never seen anything like this in our lifetimes. They've done it, and they've done a tremendous job. But now we've got to work together with the public to explain the next stage. And this is what tonight was all about. It was the beginning of that more detailed roadmap.
And there will be more details coming tomorrow. Can you tell us more about what's going to happen tomorrow?
So tomorrow there'll be a publication of a 50-page document alongside a statement to Parliament. The Prime Minister will do that at the same time, as he should do. Then on Tuesday there will be publication of more guidance about transport and about safe ways of working. So filling in those important details, giving reassurance to travellers, to workers, to people who want to have as much confidence as possible that what they're doing is the right thing and the safe thing, and that together we are still working collectively to fight this virus.
All right, let me bring in Bridget and Ed now and ask whether they are reassured or what your initial general reaction to it. Bridget, first of all.
I think what we needed tonight from the Prime Minister was clarity and to continue to build a national consensus around what comes next. But the Prime Minister's statement has sowed confusion. It's left lots of questions. It's generated more questions than answers. And I think it will have left a lot of people feeling very anxious about tomorrow for those millions of workers who've been given little more than 12 hours notice that they might be expected to be back in the workplace. And I just don't understand why the choreography of this involves the Prime Minister making that kind of statement and further guidance coming later. People do need adequate reassurance that if they're being asked to go back to work, that it's safe for them to do so. And I think if people are concerned that they're being asked to go back and they're not sure it's safe, then firstly I'd say that they should join the trade union who will have their back in this. But also I just want to hear much more from government about how they're going to work with business and trade unions to reassure people that it's safe to go back to work and that all necessary measures will be put in place around PPE and around social distancing, because I think it is right that if we expect people to do that, we make it as safe as possible for that to happen.
What about you, Ed? What was your initial reaction to it?
Well, I agree with Bridget that it was quite confusing. I worry that people, tuned in to watch the Prime Minister tonight, and afterwards they'll still not be sure what the policy meant for them. I mean, do they have to go back to work tomorrow? Can they use the train or the tube? And the shift in messaging from stay at home to stay alert is really odd. I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would almost be funny. It just doesn't really mean very much. And not only was it a bit confusing.
Ed, would you have stuck with the original stay-at-home message instead then?
Yeah, just as Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland decided to on the basis of scientific evidence, and that's where I was going to go from this, actually. Robert's quite right. People want reassurance. People are really worried and, in fact, frightened out there. And to reassure them, it seems to me, the Prime Minister had to level with us a bit more than he did. What is the justification for this big shift? Liberal Democrats listen to an evidence-based argument with some facts and expert opinion. And I was actually on a call earlier today with the Prime Minister, and I specifically asked him, could he be more transparent in the expert advice that was behind this decision? Could he publish it? Because that's the only way that the public, the people in Parliament can really assess whether this new messaging strategy, this new approach, is based on science, is based on expert advice from people in SAGE, or if it's coming from people like Dominic Cummings and et al. And I seriously want to be reassured. This is so important for our country, but the Prime Minister hasn't gone far enough to do that tonight.
Is there going to be publication of that sort of evidence, Robert?
Well, we will see tomorrow in the document much more detail. But I take polite issue with Ed about the basis of this. Don't forget SAGE have been meeting regularly and gathering the information. We are obliged by the law, the Coronavirus Act, to review this position every 3 weeks. It was quite right that the Prime Minister made his statement tonight as a culmination of that, and clearly the basis is there. We've been talking about the R rate, the transmission rate, and the importance of keeping that down below 1. The Prime Minister talked about a figure between 0.5 and 0.9. Clearly it's a different rate in perhaps in the care home sector. It might be different in the community. We are talking and we are levelling with the British public about the evidence that we have, and the Prime Minister was very honest about this being a conditional plan. He said that if we needed to put the brakes on, if we needed to change tack, then we would. And having this new system, this 1 to 5 scale, based upon science, based upon the evidence, I think is a really grown-up way of sharing this information with the British public
and
levelling with them.
You're talking there about a COVID alert system, which will be run by a joint biosecurity centre assessing the state of the virus at any given point with a 5-step warning system. You reassured, Ed?
Well, not really, because what I want to understand, and Robert hasn't helped me, I'm afraid, is what's changed. Because Robert quite rightly talked about the RR number, which we've all learnt about, but what I didn't understand is why the Prime Minister, this assessment, could say what he did compared to the last assessment. There was no attempt to give us that reassuring justification for this. Now, we all want to get back to normal. Of course we do. But surely we want to do that from a safety first basis. And if you're working from that basis, you have to go back to the science. And you also have to explain what safety measures you're putting in place. Where is the testing, the tracing, the isolation strategy that's essential for us to be able to begin to ease the lockdown?
Let's look at that a bit more later, but Bridget, just to come back to you, Scotland and Wales say that they weren't consulted about the decision to junk the stay home slogan for England. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it's concerning because we do need to move in lockstep. But, there have been different application in some aspects. But I think if we want to build that consensus, then there has to be a clarity of message. But the difficulties around not just the clarity of messaging has led through to clarity around issues of policy too. So we haven't seen the numbers that we need to get to around testing. For the 8th day running, the government has missed its own target. Now, whether that target is the right target, the government has set it, but we know that we'll need to go much further beyond that as part of any exit strategy around a mass ramping up of community-based testing. We're not getting to where we need to be already. There is so much more that needs to be done. And I think, again, if you look at some of the questions that the statement again raises, and I do hope there will be greater clarity about the direct impact this will have on people's lives. We saw the announcements from the Prime Minister around the plan to increase fines for that minority of people who don't do what's asked of them. But then there was nothing on how guidance for employers will be enforced. So there is an imbalance there. It has to be part of a much better, more joined-up strategy. The economic response together with the public health response and a much broader plan of action. Because I think we all want to try and do the right thing to save lives, but we need to have greater clarity on what that will involve directly in our own lives.
OK, we'll talk about the workplace in just a sec, but Katie, the idea of Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland going a separate way, I mean, how dangerous is that kind of divergence, do you think, as the UK tries to move out of lockdown?
Well, I think it's very problematic, and it clearly isn't the Prime Minister's preference. The sense from Cabinet and those in number 10 is they've wanted to move in lockstep the whole United Kingdom as you move out of lockdown, and that's for several reasons, but a big part is so you don't have mixed messages. Ultimately, if you have one part of the UK saying it's safe to do something, and then say Scotland saying it's not safe, which we're beginning to get a sense of today with Nicola Sturgeon's comments, and contrasted to the Prime Minister's, there's a sense that it's going to be even harder to get people to accept the change in advice. And I think one of the big problems the government does have when it comes to eventually easing lockdown is one of the big surprises in government is how many people do support lockdown continuing. So actually you have a communications challenge on your hands in terms of convincing people when it is safe to do things. So I think having different parts of the UK taking different routes, as is beginning to happen, is very difficult and does make that harder. And on the stay alert change we had, ultimately it's clear that lots of the figures too in the Tory party, but particularly the devolved administrations, don't feel as though they were consulted on that. And lots of people said it's a very confusing slogan, but I think the issue here is stay alert is not as clear as stay home, but ultimately it's not a clear message anymore because there's different parts of the different people to do different things, and that makes it much harder to have a simpler message going forward.
And Robert, I mean the fact that different messages and emphasis across the UK will make it more difficult to convey a central message, but you've got a fundamental problem as well, haven't you, that in England people are being told now they can take unlimited exercise, which includes being able to drive to a park or drive somewhere else, but they won't be able to cross the border into Wales or Scotland to go to a Welsh or Scottish park, will they?
And it's frankly slightly more complicated than that, because I think some of the relaxations on exercise in Scotland come into place tomorrow. I think if the First Minister was here, she would say that a lot of her emphasis is on the way she wants to present things. She's perfectly entitled to do that as the First Minister of Scotland, as indeed the First Minister of Wales is. But I can say, having sat in the COBRA meetings, having sat in the Cabinet meetings with devolved representatives from the First Minister downwards, I think there's been a sense of common purpose here, actually, about what it is we're trying to achieve. Yes, we've got devolved nations. They've got their rights and they've got their powers. They're going to want to do things in their particular style and way. But I think ultimately underlying all of this is still that this whole nation's common purpose. And therefore, whilst, yes, I accept some of the messaging might be slightly different, that sense of common purpose remains very, very strong from my own experience.
And it is true, isn't it, that you won't, from England, be able to go to a Welsh park. You can't cross the border.
Well, the rules might be different, and therefore, for me, going to see my mum and dad in South Wales, I obviously got to bear that in mind. I won't be going, by the way, because I take the view that, you should only be travelling if you need to, or if you want to do the exercise that we would encourage from Wednesday. And I think we can trust people, to be grown up about this, use their good judgment. Yes, you will get a few, I'm afraid, people who just don't get it, but I think the majority of the British people are very sensible and do the right thing, as we've seen spectacularly over the last 2 months.
Bridget, back to you about workplaces. People are actively now being encouraged to go back to work if they can't work from home. You were talking about the reassurances that you think they need. What would it take then now for people to feel confident about going back to work? And do you think a lot of people will decide to stay at home rather than take up the Prime Minister's invitation?
Workers were asked to stay at home because the government said it was the right thing to do. So where that's changing, we need to see clarity from the government on what that will involve, both for individuals but also, more importantly, for employers, who have already expressed concern this evening around what it will mean for their workers getting to work, around the transport plan that we will need to see published, around what will be needed in terms of PPE. This lockdown, of course, affects different groups in different ways and will have had a disproportionate impact on those of us who are not able to work from home. I'm able to work from home, but lots of my constituents, especially those in manufacturing or construction, have not had that opportunity, and especially for those who fall outside of government schemes. I understand that they will want to make sure they've got that income, given